For more on this, we're joined by Henry Niman, a biomedical researcher at Pittsburgh-based Recombinetics, and analyzing viral evolution and spread of the disease. Henry, hello.
Hello, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for being here Christmas week. How concerned are you that this strain of avian flu is going to spread south of the border?
Well, it actually already has. There was an outbreak at Wilder Lake, and there has been an outbreak in Winston, Oregon. So it's already in the United States, but it hasn't hit a commercial farm here yet.
And so the vector is what, wild geese or wild ducks, that sort of thing?
Yeah, pretty much it looks like it's mostly in ducks, and there's actually two different versions of the virus. You've got the H5N2, and it originated from H5N8, and both have actually come to the United States also. You haven't seen H5N8 yet, but you probably will.
It's a short flight across the border from where these farms are in the Fraser Valley. Is British Columbia doing enough to keep a lid on this?
Well, they're doing a lot. It's hard to keep a lid, mostly because it's in the wild birds, and a lot of the wild birds that are infected have already migrated to the area, so they're going to be in the area for probably the whole winter, and the virus that's in the birds is already in this high path category, so essentially it is very lethal to poultry. And it doesn't have to evolve or mutate. It basically, as soon as it reaches the poultry, it spreads very quickly and has a very high mortality.
You've been fairly critical of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency for their lack of getting information out in a timely fashion.
Yeah, it seemed that when it first came, they didn't acknowledge that it was this Fujian or Asian strain. And that was a question that immediately arose, mostly because the poultry was dying so quickly. So it looked like it was high path in the wild birds, and there's never been a high path in wild birds in North America before. So it looked like it was Asian, and it took them until like the 12th to actually acknowledge that it was the Asian strain. And they still haven't released the sequences yet, but I think that's going to happen fairly quickly. But I think it was a disadvantage to the people in the area because they didn't realize how serious the situation was. And I think they have a much better idea now, but it took a couple of weeks.
Explain that to me. What's the difference between an Asian strain of this virus and, say, what other kind of strain would it be?
It would be North America.
Right.
So all of the outbreaks that have been in Fraser Valley to date have been from North American strains of either H7 or H5. And this particular version really evolved from H5N1. I think your listeners probably are more familiar with that. That's been in China. That's caused human cases, and it's essentially endemic in China. And that it started to evolve, and it picked up different ends. So what you have right now is H5N2. The other one is H5N8, but they both have the same H5, which is a Fujian strain. It's the same H5 that was in H5N1. It actually has, the virus has 8 genes, and 3 of the 8 genes are actually from H5N1. And so the difference is that the H5 has what's called it's a cleavage site. The virus basically has to cleave the H5 to get into the cells. And if there's a certain genetic characteristic, it's called a polybasic cleavage site, so it can be cleaved by different cell types, then it invariably is high path in poultry. The wild birds have some immunity to it, so they can actually be infected with the high path, and waterfowl tend to be resistant to that. But the poultry isn't, and even some ducks and geese aren't because they haven't seen it in North America. So this is a version that's been in Asia. This is the first time it's come to North America. And the H5 in either H5N8 or H5N2 is the same. What's in Canada right now has got 5 of the genes from the H5N8 and 3 of the genes from North American,
Okay.
including the N2.
So there's been 250,000 birds culled so far at 11 farms in the Fraser Valley. How many more are we going to see before we see an end of this outbreak, or is that too hard to tell?
It's too hard to tell. In addition to the 11 commercial farms, there was also a small holding that was confirmed over the weekend. So this is a small farm that only had like 85 birds, and they were infected also, and they were also culled over the weekend. And so those smaller holdings, I think since this latest one, they'll probably take more precautions to keep the wild birds away from their poultry, but they're at risk, and so are the commercial farms. And even though Fraser Valley really has probably the best biosecurity in the world, there still are 11 farms already, and there's not an indication that it's necessarily going to get that much better that quickly, because there's a constant source from the wild birds to introduce the virus. So even if you have no virus on the ground, you still have virus in the birds, and then their droppings have the H5N8 or H5N2. And then one way or another, they seem to be able to get into the barns, whether it's through rodents that pick it up on their feet and manage to get in on the ground, or whether it's small birds that actually kind of get through holes in the top, one way or the other, or potentially people bringing it in. But there's probably a fair amount of biosecurity to keep people from actually bringing it in. But it's probably these smaller birds or rodents that are probably getting the virus in the barns.
Okay, we have to leave it there. We're out of time. I want to thank you for yours. Henry Niman, a biomedical researcher, joining us via Skype tonight from Pittsburgh. Good night.
Okay, good night, Aaron.